Are we live? I always have to ask that. Did the stream start? Oh, good. I think it did. Hi. Is there audio? I should always ask. Hi. Wow. Oh wow, there's a lot of comments and stuff already. Hey everyone. Hello. Oh, Craig TV, your game was canceled. I'm sorry. I'm glad you can join us instead. Hello. Hey everyone. So, we've got a live stream. I wasn't originally planning for this video to necessarily be a live stream, although it's totally fine if it is, but I originally tried to film it and I was still a bit under the weather after GaryCon, so I tried and I was like, this isn't good. I didn't want to immortalize my horrible upper respiratory things going on during that, so I was like, oh, this isn't going to be good. And then I went to try to film it again and had my setup not really ready to go or set up correctly, and so I was like, it didn't work out and I'm just gonna go live. So here we are. Thanks for joining me, you all. And I want to talk specifically about what West Marches are with this video, because this is I guess you could say it's a style of gameplay, and it's something that actually really bubbled up in the TTRPG space, like back in the very beginnings of the OSR. So back in like 2009 or so is I think when we first kind of started seeing people talking about this, and it was first discussed by Ben Robbins on his blog Ars Ludi, and I'm probably saying that wrong. It's Latin, sorry. And Ben was the first person to really pioneer the idea of the style of play, which kind of draws from what a lot of people now have come to see is the style of play that the originators of the game also used to some extent. And so the very first thing that I would do if you're interested in this play style is to read the blog that I linked in the description, which goes to Ben's first discussion of this. And it's one of the most famous blog posts of the OSR. And that is a 4-part series talking about how he ran a West Marches style game and his experiences with it and the particular things he learned from doing so. And so, yes, I see in the comments too that there are other folks who have talked about this since then. There's a popular series on the Alexandrian about this, which is extremely cool and helpful. I know that Matt Colville has done a video about it, actually several years ago at this point. Baron Durop has done a video about it. Lots of people have talked about this. And one of the most interesting aspects of West Marches style games, and we'll get into how they work, is that they seem in some ways to be a lofty ideal of a type of gameplay style that isn't easy to achieve unless you have the right tools and setup. And so I want to talk about maybe ways we can try to get ourselves closer to that potentiality. And so I'm just checking in where everybody's from just because I love seeing this. Brazil, thanks for always saying hi where you're from, everybody. That makes my day to see that. It's just so cool to know people are tuning in from all kinds of places. Yeah. Yep. Oh, there's homework in this. A little bit of homework. I consider it to be fun. All right. Yeah. Oh, your input about running hex crawls in downtime clicked. Thank you. I think that's something that I talked about a little bit, and I want to suggest to people as something they can consider. Hex crawling is a fun part of the game, but it actually, it was originally a bolt-on to the original D&D rules. It was a board game, I think, by Avalon Hill that was called Outdoor Survival, if I recall. And I'm probably going to get that. It might be called, like, Overland Survival or something. But hex crawling rules were lifted from that board game and inserted or appended onto D&D. And, I've always felt that the gameplay loop of Overland hex crawling, it in some ways is like dungeon crawling, but maybe not quite as full of decision points as dungeon crawling is. It could be, but I think that anytime we try to introduce a lot of complexity into the hex crawling systems, I find that it can become cumbersome and players can even bounce off of it or grow very tired of it quickly for some reason. And, it might be funny to note that when I was originally developing Curse Scroll 4, which is a part of the Western Reaches Kickstarter ongoing right now, we had a very, very robust and intricate hex crawling system that we built out. And I had a lot of help from people in the Discord server and playtesting it and putting it through its paces. And it was really interesting, but it was really very, very crunchy. And I ended up pulling back the design quite a bit because I felt that while some people might really enjoy it, it just felt very involved in a way that wasn't really what Shadowdark does ordinarily. So I will eventually publish those rules. I've been meaning to do that as just like a free download on our site so that if you want really crunchy hex crawling rules, they offer quite a bit more decision points and granularity. But I don't know if they're right for every group that just wants to move through the wilderness. And let me bring it back around to the point I was going to make, which is that I think that overland travel is something that you could potentially handle during downtime or in between sessions with your players. Because I think a session focused entirely on hex crawling itself can be fun, but it also can sometimes feel like it's the between a destination and so originating place and a destination. So I would say consider doing that. I generally have enjoyed running hex crawls during my games, but resolving them during downtime or in between sessions can be a way to sort of expedite gameplay and, give your characters or your players maybe a decision point. So when they sit down for the next session that you're going to do, maybe they had a really bad go of it traveling there and they decide to change course with their plans, which then kind of lets you utilize that session time a bit more impactfully instead of spending the whole session having a really arduous hex crawl and then just retreating at the end of it, which can be, I guess, a little bit of a down note. So that's some of my thoughts. Now, I don't know how long this stream's gonna go. When I film a video, I usually talk for like at least 20 minutes and then edit it down to about 8. So like a main channel video. So we're not going to be filtering out all of my like rambling. That's why my hair sometimes seems to change sides, like, with the snap of a finger. It's usually because I just cut like 3 minutes of rambling out where I flipped my hair like 6 times in between here and there. But not always, but sometimes. So let's go over, first of all, some of the major points of what creates a West Marches style of game, which is what Ben Robbins innovated on Ars Ludi. I'm going to follow along a little bit with what he talks about in his own blogs, but maybe at a higher level, just sort of give you guys a Cliff Note summary. And one of the very first things is that you have a larger group of players. This is a style of gameplay that's intended actually for groups of maybe 12 to 14 players, and at least in Ben's experience. Humongous is requesting hair flip. Gladly. The hair moves on its own. The hair is the main character. I am just along for the ride. So 12 to 14 players, and that sounds like an enormous group, right? I mean, I would never recommend running a game for 12 players at once unless you know something I don't know, because it can be very, very difficult to manage that big of a group and have it be fun for everybody, because even with Shadowdark's fast gameplay, I think it's a long wait between turns. So when we're talking about 12 to 14 players, what's happening here is that the players are actually in charge of their own destiny about when they want to play the game. And so in Ben Robbins' case, he had this pool of around 14 players, and they were all connected during this time an email chain. Now, and this was in like around 2009, so now we have things like Discord that maybe allow, different forms of communication than what was available at that time. And all of the players were connected in this way online to discuss what they wanted to do. And then Ben offered up his schedule for when he was open to run sessions at specific times and dates. He basically was like you schedule me when you want to play style of doing it. And the really interesting part of this was that it ended up really helping overcome the scheduling woes that people have with their regular sessions, which is, oh, we all want to meet on Thursday at 7 p.m., but, Bob can't meet that night because his kid has soccer practice, and then maybe we could reschedule to Friday, but Julie has a dentist appointment, so, we're going to have to table it, and maybe we just won't play this week. I think that one of the hardest parts of running D&D games for adults is finding a single time to all get together. So this really solves that problem, because scheduling is made available to the players who want to play when they can play, and this often means you'll have a rotating group of players. And the ideal situation here is that the players are aware of different leads that they want to chase down in the game world, and they will rally little groups together around shared interests in what they want to pursue. So you might have one group of 4 players who are really interested in figuring out what's in that cave 3 hexes away where there were some bones littered outside, and they suspect there might be treasure in there. So the players have the autonomy to talk amongst themselves and form the group that's going to go on that foray. And then once they have a group ready to go, they inform the game master with enough lead time so that the game master can prepare the material, which is maybe a day or 2. Everybody will have a different comfort threshold for how much notice they want. And then the game master runs a session for that group. And one big part of this, and we're talking in general about scheduling here, but one big part of this is that the players, the characters, really, part of the deal here is that they will go out on their adventure, but then they have to return back to town or to safety at the end of their adventure. And you might be wondering why this is. And, it seems a bit strict. It's definitely different from the way conventional campaigns are run. But the reason is because you don't want characters to suddenly be frozen in time in weird spots around the map and potentially have crossover or run into each other. Let's say a group of 4 characters went to the Goblin Caves and then didn't get out in time, so they're halfway through exploring them, and then another group decides to go there 3 days later. There's the chance that they could all run into each other, but the other players aren't playing with you that night, so how in the world would you handle that? So it's a way to kind of keep things tidy. And another important factor is that and this, I think, I don't know how much Ben really mentioned this in his blogs, but this is something that strikes me as an unspoken but very crucial element, is that the players are allied with each other, but they are competitive with each other. So this is not like a PvP situation or like, a Bronstein situation where the characters are adverse to each other. They should be cooperating. And that's another big factor. How you're playing a West Marches game is when there's the common sharing of information between the players, and they are trying to mutually help each other. And so what will drive players to seek out the treasure and the cool stuff is a little bit of competitiveness, in that we think there might be cool treasure over there. We want to get it before someone else gets it. But that's about where it ends, And so there's there needs to be a feeling of like friendly competition, but also mutual benefit. And I think that's an important thing to foster as the game master, and something you want to be aware of. Because Ben Robbins in his blog did point out that competitiveness should not ever broach into adversity. And also one thing he mentioned was that you want to try to encourage the players to be, I guess, I don't know if the right word is generous, but accepting of as much adventuring as they can do, in that if a player suggests doing something and they get absolutely 0 responses from the group at large, it can feel a little weird. It can feel a little bit like, am I being ignored? Or do people not think I have a fun idea? Do people not want to play in the game sessions with me? So I personally think that if you're going to run a campaign of this style, I think you should probably talk to the players about that up front and be like, hey, if someone is batting around an idea, let's at least all try to engage with those ideas, even if we can't ultimately form a group around them. You don't want anybody to feel like ignored. Feelings can come into play in this, and so you just got to be careful that people aren't feeling ignored. and that people aren't becoming actually adverse or combative with each other. And perhaps one way to shake up the dynamic is if you notice cliques forming, which can be a thing where like the same 4 people always adventure with each other. You can require that the groups shake up the contents of their groups each time. Like you can't play more than 2 sessions in a row with the same group of people. And that's a way to really encourage sort of a mixed environment of participation. And of course, not all players will be able to play as much as some. There will be more dedicated players than others simply due to free time and, motivation levels and all of that. So I think trying to find a middle road between forcing players to always be changing groups and then making sure that the less active players or the quieter players are still being acknowledged is pretty important. So yeah. And I see a question pop up in the chat, and the benefit of doing a live is that I can answer them, so I would love to. So the question is, do the players tend to play together in the same small groups? Oh, see, I'm glad you said that. Yes, that is something that Ben Robbins noted as a potential downfall, and something that he actively worked to prevent by requiring group shakeups. So this is like kind of the core here. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things Ben mentioned that are very important, that are a bit less weighty than these things. And one of them is that there's a huge emphasis on like wandering monsters and the world being a place where the game master is merely conveying what's happening in the world. The game master isn't building stories or plots. The entire campaign is driven by the player's decisions to go pursue things. And so what's required for this to work is for there to sort of be a world already available for them to explore, and a few hints and points of interest that will make them want to go out and explore those things. But then, this is a style of game in which the game master is very much a neutral arbiter, and they're not trying to introduce plot threads. They're trying to offer a ton of things for the players to take interest in and pursue on their own. And what that means is that a lot of plot threads will not, or a lot of points of interest or rumors will not be followed up on, because the players can only do so much. And the game master has to be careful not to try to insert like world events that are going to divert all of the attention of all the players over to it. So this is the kind of thing where you let the players choose their routes, and then you really have to kind of let the world exist and merely be the person showing the players the world as they discover it. And that can be, especially for people who are used to running story-driven campaigns, that can be quite a mentality change. Very, very big mentality change, because when you're running a campaign, you're trying to drive the story in a certain direction and offer the characters hooks and clues and links and NPCs who are going to be feeding them sort of the what they're supposed to be doing each time. And in this situation, it is the exact opposite of that. Which brings me to another important point. Ben talks in his blog about how town or safety is supposed to be boring. There's not supposed to be a lot of intrigue going on in town. And, at first it seems a little bit contrary to what we would normally expect in a D&D campaign, but here's the reason. The point of this style of campaign is for the players to go out and explore. And if there's really a lot of shenanigans happening in town, they're going to suddenly get stuck in town. And they're going to start to think, oh, the adventure's here in town. It's not out there. And so Ben really cautions that people try not to make town very interesting. It's safe. Law enforcement is extremely strict so that shenanigans are discouraged. And it's actually he even goes so far as to say that NPCs really don't have a lot of rumors. And that is because it is the players who are the ones who gain the rumors. It's the players who go out into the wilds and see a strange building off in the distance, or find a scroll in an old tomb that talks about the buried mine of the mummy, of the golden mummy or something. So I think you can start with a few light rumors, like very, very lightweight rumors at the beginning of the session. Like the local barkeep knows that there's this weird temple like a day's march away that all these adventurers say that, has some cool stuff in it. But beyond that, it becomes the players who know the things, not the NPCs. And so I found that to be a really interesting and actually effective way to try to push the players out into exploring and being the ones who make these interesting discoveries. One thing I will say is that I think I personally think that there can be things that happen in towns that are interesting. And one difference in the way that I would be running games like this versus what Ben did was all the players in Ben's game were centered in the same town, and that was the hub from which they explored. And, you know, in what I'm writing and how I run open style games, there are multiple towns throughout the world. So the characters could potentially be sort of moving their home base between different locations. And there is the potentiality for some intrigues or dramas to happen in town. But I think it's really important to note that those things should be limited in scope. They should be like singleton events or specific smaller problems that could be solved. And then, you know, I think that having something interesting happening in town, but having it be easily resolved kind of makes it almost feel like the characters rolled into town and fixed the problems. And now, you know, we've solved what's going on here. Maybe we should continue to explore and find new places. So for me, there's a happy medium there that I think I personally feel a little bit of town interest can be incorporated when we're talking about a location that has multiple towns or cities, but just make sure that it doesn't overshadow the interest of going out and exploring. Shadowdark in particular will help you with this because the way to gain levels is to find treasure. And Ben Robbins was actually running his West Marches campaign back in the day using 3rd edition D&D, which progression was based on experience points for killing monsters primarily. So I think that the motivation system for players can have a big impact on this. And if you're using Shadowdark and running a West Marches style game, remember that it's the big treasure that will really push the players into action. And so if you feel that they're getting stuck somewhere or town has become too interesting all of a sudden, maybe it's time to hit the gas on big treasure rumors out there and rein it in a little bit on the drama that's occurring in Civilization. So let me pause here to answer some cool questions. I thought I saw that there were some really cool people in here. Oh, Victor's here. I thought I saw Black Lodge was here. I thought DM Tales. Oh, Zipra on Disney. Hey, y'all, by the way, on the Kickstarter, we released a Mystery Monday 2 days ago, and it was actually a mini adventure written by Zipra on Disney, and I think it's really cool, and it's a free download, so just go grab it. You know, it's a free adventure. Why not? Who else is here? So many people. Oh, people are asking who won the Spellcaster vote. Well, it's still open for votes, so I don't want to weight it in any way by telling people. I'm probably going to close it 2 days before our stream so that I can make sure I do all of the research. And, you know, if we get a class that has a precedent in previous D&D design, I really like to make sure that I go closely examine how it's evolved throughout the editions to make sure that I'm giving respect to the design ideas of that class. We might end up getting something that has very little design precedent, though, in which case I'm just going to spend more time researching source material for inspiration, like fiction and all that. What else? How do you deal? Oh, Mikey the Goat Cat, cool name by the way, asked, how do you deal with handing out magic items fairly in a West Marches game? That is a great question. I would say that the distribution of magic items, I feel that a game master should plant magic items in advance in various points of interest and then leave the discovery of those things to the players. You know, players who pursue magic items and who go out there and take risks are going to find more than the players who don't. So I think the fairness comes from the passiveness of the game master. The game master is not in any way influencing which players are doing what. The items are just out there to be found, and a bit like an Easter egg hunt. An Easter egg hunt is quite fair as long as everybody is of the same age level and not playing against my wife, who's extremely good at them. It's not fair. She's not allowed to do them. As long as everybody has roughly the same starting point, it's whoever finds it, finders keepers then. All right. So where are we? Won't strict town guard clash with carousing? Sean LT? That's a really good question. Possibly. I think that strict town guards should probably clash with ridiculous crime. I think that a lot of carousing is designed to be, like low grade shenanigans. Like burning a tavern down is a bit of a shenanigan. It's quite a shenanigan. And you may want to restrain some of the carousing results in a West Marches game if you feel that the town guard would react really strongly to them, or if there's like only one tavern in town and if you burn it down, that's it. So that is a good point to bring up, Sean, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because I would certainly season to taste if you want to keep the shenanigans constrained. Maybe burn down the tavern turns into you started a fire in a tavern that almost burned it down. It barely got under control, but you're in big trouble and you can't come back to the tavern for at least a few weeks. So a question: what if some players want to move their safe hub while other players are still stuck in the original safe hub? Doesn't that force them to play in certain groups from then on? Yes, absolutely. That's a big concern. So I think in a situation where you have a lot of players, like in a classic West Marches style game, I think that if you're gonna move the safe hub, it has to be a mutually agreed upon thing. That's a very important point. And part of the thing here too is that the players are going to be communicating with each other, and that dynamic is trying to mimic them all like gathering at the tavern and sharing war stories about what they learned. And Ben even talks in his blog about how they started this sort of in-world fiction where a big table in the tavern, some adventurers have been like scratching a rudimentary map onto it, and then all the players really latched onto that and they all started making a shared map. And the table in the tavern was like the shared map, and that was the fiction around which all of the characters gathered, which is super cool. Oh yeah, if you have the shucked oyster in your in your hometown, that can burn down all the time. I mean, that one's fine. Just add that one in as the potential burn target for all carousing. Yes, and so where was I? This is something I would probably cut out of a video if I were editing it. Me being like, what was I saying? But yes, I wouldn't move the home base unless the whole party was going with you and agreed to do it. And you need to make sure that their ability to discuss with each other in character lines up with their geographical location in world. And to that point, I wanted to next talk about the returning to safety aspect of a West Marches game. We mentioned it a bit previously, but ideally, characters will always be returning from their foray back to town or back to the chosen point of safety, the mutually agreed upon point of safety. It could be a camp or something too, but it's important that all of the characters who are not playing are located there. It does rarely happen that the player characters can't get back to safety. Ben mentioned this in his blog. He said that specifically there were 2 times when groups of players had to go 3 sessions, 3 sessions in a row, away from safety because of something really momentous that happened. I think they got taken hostage in one of them. There was a big reason, and he said, I would not do this regularly, and he said he never had this happen in a situation that went more than 3 sessions. I think he occasionally had sessions that would go 2 in this nature. But what it means is that those characters are effectively removed from their ability to form up into groups. And also, what they know, what they learn, is not allowed to be shared with the other players until they can get back to safety. So if you have this happen in your game world on occasion, even Ben himself says it's not like the end of the world. Don't make it the precedent, but definitely try to encourage the players to get back to safety and make sure that, make sure they understand that like you're only going to be able to play with this group until you guys get back. And that can be a really limiting factor for some people. Like the same group might not be able to form up again for a month because Julie's got a dentist appointment and Bob has to watch his kids at soccer practice. So I would be upfront with the players about that, why this rule exists and why only in the most extreme of circumstances would you consider bending that rule. And I will say that in the Western Reaches book that I'm working on, the Game Master section has, it's actually 2 books, and the Game Master section is actually a book. The Game Master book has some roll tables and advice for how to handle the return to safety if the players fail to. You can abstract that process. So let's say they get kidnapped, and they're kidnapped at the end of the adventure, and you decide that it's not worth keeping them away from safety, and like trapped in such a way. You don't want to turn this into a big thing that has to be, they don't need, like maybe they have to get rescued or something. It would get messy. There's a table that you can roll on that abstracts what happens to them in order for them to escape and get back to safety. To be fair, one of those results is that they die, and you could soften that, but it's a serious situation. And, I think that the cost of breaking this precedent should matter to the players. So in my case, I have the worst possible result is that your character dies. You may not feel comfortable with that being the worst possible result, so absolutely change that if you want it to be less bad. But just make sure that you set the precedent that returning to safety is pretty important. And so that's a big element. And a couple other actually the last important point that Ben shared is that I just thought I saw a question come up in here. I don't know what's, I don't know. There's someone whose message keeps getting retracted. I'm not sure what's going on. So the last thing here is that we talked about this a little bit ago, but treasure is kind of the driving factor, especially in Shadowdark. In 3rd edition, which was what Ben was using for this experiment, a treasure was really cool. Like it was still worth pursuing. Characters obviously wanted cool swords and scrolls and whatever. I think that treasure in Shadowdark has the natural benefit of being the most appealing thing of all to pursue because it's what allows character progression. So one thing that Ben did in his game world was he had dungeons scattered around. He had points of interest, but he would often make like a room or a location within these points of interest that was not able to be accessed or bypassed by characters of a certain lower level threshold or characters who didn't have the higher level spells required to get past this barricade. And what this did was make the world both feel very real because it felt like there was more out there than what was just being presented for the player's benefit in the moment. It made it feel like this was a location that has history and something about it beyond just what the characters are here to experience. And the other really cool thing is that the idea was for the players to know that there are things out there worth returning to pursue. And it kind of makes it more interesting for them because then they have to choose between, do we want to go explore and follow these other leads, or do we want to try to go back to that weird marble door that we found in the bottom of that dungeon that we just couldn't get past? I mean, we've learned a few spells since then. We've gotten better at picking locks. And I think that is really cool because what Ben would do was he would put really, really good treasure behind those locations. And he would make them like worth pursuing. And if the players decided to go back there and see if they could get through to that big treasure hoard, it was a huge moment of triumph for them. And it was really validating about making the world feel real and celebrating the fact that the players remembered that detail and then leveraged it for their benefit. So I think that's a really important thing. And I love that. I think that's a really important element of any open gameplay style, but especially of note in this style. I think that's a really cool thing to do. So that was kind of my whole rundown. And now I've talked a little bit about what a West Marches game is, and then I've talked a little bit about how I would run one of those using the Western Reaches, which is the active Kickstarter campaign we have going on. Another thing I might add is that as far as unifying the players behind like a common cause in a way to try to keep them collaborative and friendly instead of becoming like adverse is I think that having them be a part of like the same adventuring guild can be a really cool way to make that work. And there are 4 I don't know if I would call them guilds. They're more like organizations or factions. There are 4 factions in the Western Reaches that are geared towards the adventuring types, and so that might be something worth leveraging. And characters who over time gain levels while being members of those factions, they gain some benefit as a part of that, and so I think that's a cool one that could help. And let me see. I think that I'm trying to think of if there's anything else that I would recommend if you're trying this style. Here's one thing. There are numerous ways to handle the passage of time in games like this. The most common way is for time essentially to freeze between sessions. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You can absolutely run a session, a West Marches game in this style. Another way is for the players to be able to use downtime for certain activities like carousing or hex crawling, and to put some parameters on what they can do during the time between sessions when they're not playing. Something good about that is that it allows players who aren't as active in participating in these sessions for whatever reason to still kind of engage with the game world. Like, I can't meet for a session this week, but I'm going to spend this week, like trying to train. I'm going to train my character and see if they can get better at swordplay. And this is starting to approach the need for using real time in the game. I think that you can get away with this style, like a soft freeze between sessions with the allowance of downtime each week. You can do it that way, and that's still, in my opinion, frozen time style, with a bit of a relaxed approach on how to use downtime. Or you can try using real time at all times during your campaign. And this is a really interesting thing. Like, it's not very common, but it was used in the early days of D&D when the originators of the game had massive groups of players. Like, I'm talking up to 50 players playing in this style of game. And it was very challenging to keep track of where everyone was at once and what everyone was doing. Tying the passage of in-game time to real-world time helped make it very clear who was where and how long they were spending on stuff and if their character was available to be used. And it's sometimes called one-to-one time, which Celsox pointed out in the chat. And it does bring up a couple of considerations. And in fact, I'm even going to pull up some of the notes. I'm actually... I have sections in the Western Reaches GM's Guide about suggestions for choosing which style of timekeeping to run and what maybe the considerations and benefits are for you. And one of the biggest things about this is that if you are running real time, you're probably going to need to give each player more than one character, because here's what happens. Let's say your players decide that they want to spend a session doing stuff that takes a lot of time. So they get together for their session and they're like, okay, we spend 3 days hex crawling to this location, and then we do 2 nights worth we do 2 full days worth of adventuring in here, and then we spend another 3 days traveling back to town. So that's 6, 7, 8 days of time that was used up during this one gameplay session. You can do that during the gameplay session. However, then the players, those characters, become frozen in time until real world time catches up with them. And that introduces some tricky bookkeeping sometimes, because you have to be aware of, okay, they're traveling on these days, they were unavailable on those days, and then finally they'll be back to town by this date and they can start sharing information with their friends again back in town. And so you would have to kind of forbid the sharing of information until the characters have arrived back to town, which you can say that will be 8 days from now. And so those characters are taken out of play for 8 actual days of real time while the real world catches up to them. And so if they want to play during that time, they're going to have another character that they can pilot. And this is cool because it allows people to develop multiple characters, and it actually encourages it. And that can be really great in some ways. But, it also allows players who aren't doing anything to really make use of their downtime in concrete ways, because, they'll be able to say, well, this carousing session is going to take exactly 5 days. And then that gives me a bit more time between when I want to use this character and the next time to maybe do a little bit of spell research too, you know? So this turns time into a true resource, but it does require you to sort of rethink things, or, you know, kind of change your approach to how you track time. And you want to be careful about letting the characters do anything that takes up a massive amount of time, because, you know, like if they're like, oh, I want to spend the next month building a castle, it's not to say that they can't, but are they prepared to not have that character available for an actual month of game time? You know, it's a consideration. So I think that it's very interesting, and I want to give credit to, you know, I guess the Bro SR is kind of how they've titled themselves. I know that there's a writer named Jeffro Johnson who wrote at length about this and sort of helped bring this idea back into the thought space of D&D recently, you know, because there's a lot of this style of gameplay existed back in the early days of the game, but because the people who were the early players of the game were all experienced war gamers, and they were actually using war games as their foundation for what became D&D, there was a lot of knowledge and implicit understanding of rules, the passage of time, and all that kind of became lost because everyone already knew these things, and so they weren't really codified. And then there was a fidelity loss, and those ways of running the game kind of got forgotten, you know. And so there are a lot of like gaming archaeologists who put in the effort to try to recreate, to try to comb through the original versions of D&D and find, you know, explanations for why things are the way they are. And you know, there's been some really interesting rediscoveries of certain older gameplay styles, including like using one-to-one time in some cases, that I think are really, really interesting and really fun to try. I think it'd be, if anything, I would recommend that people at least try this just to see what benefits it has and how it changes the way they play, how it changes the way their players engage with the game, and to see that using one-to-one time actually really encourages the players to take advantage of their downtime in ways that some people may never have experienced. So I think it's a fun thing to try, and I definitely try to give some advice in the book about this. And I would also encourage you all to maybe read some of the works of Jeffro Johnson and folks who I believe that the corner of the old school is called the Bro SR. I can't really speak too much more about the figures involved in it, apart from saying that their primary thesis is trying to incorporate one-to-one time into D&D play. And, you know, I think that anytime people introduce a concept like that and say that it is a foundational part of D&D, there's going to be argumentation and pushback, and different philosophies within the gaming space are going to conflict with each other on that. So I do think that there has been some conflict online about these ideas. But if we're just looking at the ideas themselves, they're very interesting. And so I would encourage people to check them out. And I think that's about all I have to say on those points. And I see a few questions I'd love to try to answer because you guys were so kind to ask. L3 Monsta asks, question, how do you handle cliffhanger endings if you can't finish everything in a session? Really good question. I think that's the question that I've seen the most regarding this playstyle. There's a few ways. You can end on a cliffhanger. I just wouldn't do it often. I would make it a rare and special thing. The other thing is you abstract the player's return to town using like a roll table or something where it's like, okay, you didn't make it back to safety in time. Your penalty is you have to roll on this table and see how you made it back out of this situation. That might be the right thing to do in some cases if the cliffhanger itself is not something that you feel is like needs to be resolved in the next session. You know, maybe a cliffhanger is so interesting that you do want to pause the game there. And Ben Robbins, the creator of West Marches, as we know it, has done that before. So don't feel like you can't. It's not like verboten. I just wouldn't do it often. All right. Next question. If using real time, can players spend several days in a dungeon on a single real day? And if so, could that overlap with another group in real time going there? Adam, yes, that is one of the complications that real time can introduce. So I think that you may want to still, my opinion on this is, I would still require a return to safety regardless of how much time. So like, let's say during the session, the players spend 3 days in a dungeon, three days of game time in a dungeon. That means that after the session, you will have to have 3 days of catch up because of that. I would not personally allow the characters to camp in the dungeon once the session ends. I would still require them to return to safety. But I would say your return to safety is a 3-day trip. So we're going to add that on to the time you guys are taken out, and we're assuming that you're returning to safety. And that's a way to get them out of an environment where you could start to have these weird phantom crossovers of players. So the rule still stands. They must return to safety. You're also just now using real time to track how long that process takes in addition to making them go back to safety. And I think that by and large, that's going to be the easiest way to prevent totally weird crossovers. And that's kind of something too that you can play out the return to safety. Like you can make the random encounter rolls and stuff outside the session because that is technically happening during downtime. It's happening in the between session time. So I would play that out on the side. As a game master, I'd make those checks and let them know, hey, you triggered 2 random encounters. We're going to try to quickly play those out. Maybe we can play them out either through Discord, or you can tell me what you do, and if combat becomes initiated, then we'll play it out. You know, a lot of random encounters don't result in combat at all. So that is a little bit of a downtime thing. And I will say, as a game master of this style of play, you're going to be adjudicating or assisting with a lot of downtime activities. You're going to be having players checking in with you saying, hey, Lanoir the elf is going to spend his downtime doing XYZ. I need to make a check. Will you please watch to make sure that I roll the check required? And then the game master's like, yep, go ahead. So there's going to be a little bit of that for all the players. So you will kind of be playing when you're not playing in some ways. So that's just a thing to note. Okay. Oh, a question from, Scuddifer Mike is writing a script for one-to-one time video. He's in our chat right now. He has a lot of really excellent advice on this because he's done a lot of gameplay of this style and is connected with people who are doing a lot of playing of this style. So his YouTube channel is well worth checking out. He has some really good videos on this and leads you to other good videos as well about it. So please check it out. It sounds like he's writing a script for a one-to-one time video right now, which I am excited to hear. I'm anticipating that video with great excitement. Okay, Caustic is saying, Kelsey, could you sort out those instances where they don't return to safety with rules in between sessions? Sort them out? Yes, well, if they don't, I think that you run some risks of strange things happening. If they're at an adventuring site and then another group comes to the adventuring site, you're gonna have to get both groups involved with how they handle that with each other. Perhaps it's something you could handle like in Discord or something. It wouldn't be impossible. It just adds a lot of complexity. It means that you're about to run a complicated gaming session that week instead of a more simple one. So that's what I do. And also, Shadowdark's time passes rules would probably be worth using to check for random encounters in that situation. If the players are literally like stuck in a dungeon and you decide to leave the campaign there for the day, the session there, and we're going to not have them return to safety, a rare decision, the amount of random encounter checks they would have to suffer is just astronomical. So I would just use the time passes rules or shift to the overland travel rules that are in the Game Master's Guide to the Western Reaches for checking for random encounters for the time that they are stuck in the dungeon. So that it's not an absolutely unwieldy number of encounters. If every day you're rolling four random encounters for that group, they're going to want to get together again real quick to get out of there. So in a way, that's probably going to help encourage them to book another session really quickly and get out of that situation. Current status of the Kickstarter, you guys, I have to just stop and say that the Kickstarter is like, I don't even know how to process like how crazy it is, the Kickstarter doing just so well. I'm just so floored, and I'm so grateful that people are interested enough in the Western Reaches to support it at this level. I think we might possibly, and I don't want to jinx it, but we have the potential to be the first old school style Kickstarter to ever break $2 million in funding, which is bananas, right? Like it's historic and it's crazy. And I just think it's so cool. And I can't thank you guys enough for being interested in the work and wanting to support such a thing. And, if we see it happen, I am so excited to give all physical backers we're going to do a free premium book for all physical backers. We're making a premium copy of a standalone version of The Lost Citadel of the Scarlet Minotaur, which is the adventure in the free quick start set. But it's like in the Game Master's booklet, and it's never really been like published as its own thing. And yet it's probably our Keep on the Borderlands, really. It's the introductory adventure to Shadowdark that so many people have played that it's become a bit of a cultural touchstone. It's most certainly the most shared experience amongst Shadowdark players that I'm aware of. So I felt like it deserves to be its own premium hardcover, and I cannot wait to give that to all backers. If we can hit that stretch goal, just give them a free premium edition of this book with like cool new art. My wife drew such a cool cover for it. It looks so awesome. It's going to have like a ribbon bookmark. It's going to have new art on the inside. I just can't wait. And I would like nothing more than to pull that out of my bag and run that at a convention. So, all right, a question. Is the Western Reaches set up for being a West Marches style game, asks Forklon. Yes, it mostly is. I did talk in this video like a little bit earlier about some slightly different considerations, such as the fact that the Western Reaches does not have like a singular home base town for the players. There's like multiple towns, but we also later on in this video talked about how it's important that all of the characters choose a home base and stay there, and if they want to move it, they're gonna have to all move. It might be easier to make that make sense in the game if they're all part of the same like adventuring faction. Could make sense then. But just note that that is important. So that's a thing. Okay, a question. Is the Arcane Library a location in your worlds? Yes, it is. It actually is. So there's extremely subtle reference to it in some of the role tables in Shadowdark Core. I don't want to totally spoil this for people because I think half the fun is finding the weird buried references to it. There's some Mordanticus the Flayed is involved in some way with the actual Arcane Library, which does exist in the game world, and it is sometimes referred to in the book's buried text as Gehenna. And it is indeed in the Western Reaches. But by its nature, it's not always in a specific place. So if you were to run into it, it's probably going to be somewhere in the Jerum Desert, but it's not always there. So that's the most I'll say on it. All right. Question. Hi. It's Jody from the hi Jody from the DMD podcast. For the initial game, very first sessions, how would you disseminate those instigating rumors that allow players to self-organize? Oh, that's such a good question. I would just give it to them. What I would do, and what Ben Robbins did, was he handed his group like a treasure map that had a few sites located on it, and I think even had maybe the rumors like either written on it or like or he conveyed them verbally or through the email chain. I think honestly, you just hand them like 3 or 4 hooks from the start, and that kicks off plenty of exploration, hopefully, off in a few directions. So we need a librarian class. Yeah, voting's still open, you all. Like, voting's still open for the spellcaster class that we're going to design next week. There's a couple on there that are a bit more obscure and different, so it's time to bust out the campaign for what you want to see, because voting's going to be closing soon. So, okay, question. Would you be open to running a live session of West Marches games? Maybe. Maybe. And it's funny because a West Marches game is ideally going to have at least 12 players participating in it. And I don't necessarily know if all players... It has to be about if they're comfortable with being on a live stream. And I do find sometimes that live streaming a game requires... or it changes the dynamic of the players. And it's always a bit hard, I feel, to kind of break through that sort of subconscious feeling of like, this is not just a game anymore, it's a performance. So I think there are some really excellent live play groups that manage to do that, but I wouldn't, it wouldn't be my priority to impose that on my players. So it's probably not something I think is likely coming from my end, but you know, if I found the right group and they wanted to do it, I would definitely do it. So, okay. Question. Where can you vote? Okay. So I should put the link up. It is in one of the pinned comments on the Kickstarter's main comments pages. So that's where I would direct you to check on the Western Reaches Kickstarter, which is linked in this description. Go to the main comments, and one of the pinned comments will be the link for the spellcaster voting. All right, question. How does the City of Masks work? Do you enter and leave in West March fashion, or is it a point of light? Oh, you know what's so funny? I was just talking to Baron Durap about this earlier today. I had a phone call with him. He's a true friend, and we talk on the phone pretty often. And the City of Masks is a metropolis outlined in Curse Scroll 6. And what I would do in that city, it's an interesting case where I actually think that you would just treat it like a micro West Marches setting, where the players should choose a place of safety within the city, and then the exploration of the city becomes a sort of mini West Marches. If they leave the city, then you might want to pivot, or maybe say when they come back, they return to their point of safety, like a shared house or something, or you know, an adventuring guild place. But you know, if I were to have a campaign set in the City of Masks, and I wanted to run it in a West Marches style, I would treat the City of Masks as the West Marches world, and have the characters branch out from a point of safety, but then have to return each time. Okay. Oh, will the Jester class ever see the light of day? Maybe. I mean, I was willing to design one because I put it on that list, so it's, you know, perhaps. Maybe it will still. Okay. Will the players be able to accurately use the cloth map to run West Reaches? Yeah, to run the Western Reaches, such as mark it and pass it around between each other. Well, the challenge here is the cloth map is not something that I have designed to be like writable. Like, I know there's some cloth that's like writable and washable. It is not designed to be such. And also, some of the things on the cloth map are not accurate, because the player-facing cloth map is the player's sort of vague understanding of the geography of where they live. And there are some things in there that are not accurate. In some cases, there are entire rivers that aren't marked and things like that. So that is, I think what I would recommend is to use the cloth map overall if you want to track the players' movements, but also to have them draw a shared map with their updates to what they discover. And that's one big thing that Ben Robbins did in his West Marches game, was that the players had a shared map, and he played in person, so he brought the map around each time and had the groups updating it themselves. And I thought that was super cool, because they were doing things like taping extra hex stuff on, and like, you know, it became this like actual artifact in the game that was like really sort of messy and glorious. And it was not always accurate either. Like, the players were not perfect in their understanding. And he said it's very important not to correct their map or to tell them when it's wrong or to help them make it. It's for them to make and share with each other to help in their shared explorations of this region. All right. Oh, question. How can you incorporate mounts into Western Reaches? It seems like Hexploring Dwarfs in comparison to crawling. Hexploring Dwarfs. It seems like Hexploring Dwarfs in comparison to crawling. I wonder if there's a typo there or if it's just my brain, but I'm not totally following that last sentence. But mounts are definitely, they're good in Western Reaches because they allow faster travel. So let's say you're using one-to-one time and you have a mount and you push that mount to travel faster, you can go literally twice as far in a day as a walking character. So when time is a resource, a mount becomes a very valuable assistant. Stuff like that. And you can just move farther when you're on a mount, even if you're using fixed time. So, all right, question. Are sessions typically long to allow time for a good crawl? Does it work with a shorter session, like 3 hours? Yes, sessions are usually like, I think 3 hours is absolutely suitable for this. I will say that I know Ben Robbins has talked about how he would make adventuring sites not always like a huge dungeon. You know, a lot of times they were like a 5-room style dungeon, or, you know, this was actually, I think this was before the 5-room dungeon precedent John 4 kind of presented was even a thing. But oh, Arthur, it's okay. I think I understood your question though, hopefully. But let me know if there's a different one if you want to rephrase it, and I will do my best to answer. And so Ben Robbins would run actually usually semi-shorter dungeons. Like he would run point of interest dungeons a lot, which had 10 or less rooms, 10 or fewer rooms. Shadowdark is designed to be happy with like larger-ish dungeons. Like we have plenty of like mini adventures, and there are plenty of them as a part of this Kickstarter. Curse Scroll 4 has something like 9 in it. And there are plenty more. And I think those are great to scatter around, and they do make a good adventuring site for this style of play. And so I would probably favor shorter dungeons just because of the time constraints of each session, and then have like maybe nearby dungeons to the home base that are longer. And of course, like every here and there, one that's longer just out in the world, because it's a challenge unto itself. Like maybe the characters are starting to acquire powerful magic that allows them to travel quickly, and then it becomes more feasible for them to get to those dungeons more quickly. Or maybe they can discover a fairy door in the woods two hexes west that takes them like 20 hexes north, and then it suddenly opens up the ability to explore sites that are more dense and larger because there's more time. So, all right, is there a giant GM map? Currently, no, there's not a giant GM version of the map because I don't see that being used in gameplay the same way that a player's map would. But we can always think about maybe getting a bigger print of it. Question, what are Fey creatures in the Fey realm like in Shadowdark? Oh, I've never strongly defined the Fey realm in Shadowdark, but I feel like it would be very like a Shakespearean, like Midsummer Night's Dream style Fey realm. I think that it's a... I'm trying to think of a good comparison in like lore. I would start with Midsummer Night's Dream for inspiration on what I think it would look like. You know, noble elves of capricious nature, Fey-like creatures, time passing strangely, stuff like that. Question, any specific advice for open table FLGS games? Yeah, I've run lengthy open table style games that were sort of like West Marches light because we didn't have as big of a pool of players. And we didn't do the scheduling thing because it was a mix of adults and like younger people. So there wasn't really an easy or good way for us to all be in online communication. But I would say that if you're running an open table, you're going to have to make the difficult decision of capping your group size or bringing on another game master to help you run if more than however many people you want to run for show up, because I ran into that a lot. We had a couple games where it was like 10 or 12 people playing, and I did my best. I wasn't really expecting the games to be that popular at the time. I was still playtesting Shadowdark, so I was deeply flattered, but also like, what do I do? This is a huge group. This is unwieldy, and we can't do this all the time. So that's the biggest thing I would try to figure out is, you know, what if your group gets really big and you're not using the scheduling method of West Marches? You're going to have to figure out how to cap your group size or bring in another game master. Question, is there an outline of heaven/hell in the new books? Not in these books. No, not in these books. Those are still very vague. Those are probably based on like the more classical Italian Catholic Dante's Inferno view, in my opinion, but they're not well defined in our game world. So no major knowledge on that front. I do feel like demons in this game world are completely extra dimensional creatures of like there's just an unfathomable number of different types of demons in different dimensions, and you know, almost like the 40K style, the warp and stuff, like just a vast alternate set of dimensions. So I think that like demons in particular in the Shadowdark world should be treated as the demons are in like Conan the Barbarian, where they're just completely unfathomable, unique, extra dimensional, powerful, eldritch, strange creatures. Or like Vancian demons. Yeah. Indeed. Alchemic Raker is here. Oh, Alchemic Raker. I'm glad to see you here. Alchemic Raker wrote Hell March, which is a set of like mass combat rules that can be used with Shadowdark and other old school systems, and I think it's really, really awesome. I've been reading it with great interest. Alchemic Raker, when are you going to print it in a physical print? Please do it. I will make my own zine of it for my own use, of course. I love doing that, but I think it would be such a great table copy type thing to have too. I think that'd be so cool. So if you're thinking about it, at least coming from me, I'd love to see it. All right. So question. Let's do like a few more minutes of questions. I think let's do like 10 more minutes, and then I want to see, did it get super dark in here yet? No, it's not quite too dark in here. Yeah, okay, let's do 10 more minutes, and I'm so grateful that you guys are still here. It looks like we still have a lot of concurrent viewers, which is awesome. Question, how about planner travel? Maybe with vehicles like spell jamming ships. Totally. You know, honestly, I almost hate to reinvent the wheel sometimes on things that I think are so cool, like Planescape and stuff. Like, all of those worlds could have a place in Shadowdark. Like, you know, the ability of people to use like Spelljammer type ships, like, that's awesome. That can also exist in Shadowdark, and I think that no one should feel like it can't. I haven't written specifically on such things, but you know, just because I haven't written it doesn't mean it can't exist, you know? As I'm sure you know. You guys don't need me to tell you that, but... Oh, love the transparency about your design decisions. Oh, thanks. I'm glad. I think if I explain a decision, it makes a lot more sense than just being like, yes or no, no explanation. But I think it's helpful to try to qualify why I'm making a design decision so that people can see the thought that goes into it. Whether or not that thought is actually valuable or intelligent is another question, but at least I want to show people how I make decisions about stuff in case maybe they want to design something and it makes them think about something that's helpful to them. Question, can we expect a Spanish translation of Shadowdark soon? Greetings from Argentina. I think so. It's in the works. We're talking to people about that, and we're talking to various teams about language localizations. We have had to put that on pause a little bit just because of the incredible lift that this Kickstarter has caused, but I would love to see Shadowdark in Spanish and other languages. We currently have Brazilian, Portuguese, and French in the works. Those are well underway, and those are definitely, I can talk about those openly because they are announced and happening. So there's more coming, and I wish I could say exactly when, but it is important to me, so I don't think it's going to be like an insanely long wait. Question, do you regret Barbarian not being the stretch goal winner because you didn't get to make a Conan class type yet? Yes, I would have liked to. No, I actually really, I know that there was like a lot of people who were unhappy that the Paladin won because there are other knights that exist in Shadowdark. And I totally get that, but like there's all kinds of different spellcasters that exist in Shadowdark too. And as long as you make them differently flavored, then I think it's valuable. And I actually thought it was a really valuable design challenge, because if I'd been given something to design that hasn't really ever been done before, I think that we might have left on the table some lessons in how to deconflict design from other existing classes. And like, I mean, a barbarian would have been a similar situation in that there's a sea wolf, which is a lot like a barbarian already. So how would we have made this one different? But I think of all the classes, the Paladin was the hardest on that list to deconflict. And so I'm glad we got to do a live stream about that and kind of talk through how my process for that is, because it's really important. It's really important. So I thought it was a cool opportunity. And I really do like the Paladin, actually. I think it's pretty cool. I'm happy with the version we have going right now, which I will post soon. We made some minor changes to it since the live stream, just because I've been collecting feedback and I had a chance to sleep on some stuff and look back through other things I've designed and think about it. So we made some changes, which I will share soon. Nothing major, but somewhat. Okay, question, in West Marches, as players fully explore a region around their home base, do you have them establish a new home base in another region, or do they have to long travel between sessions? Usually their home base remains fixed and they can change it with a unanimous decision, in my opinion. But yeah, I think that the home base, the nature of the home base isn't the only thing that matters about it is that all the characters are located at it. So they could change it. And in fact, there are factions again in the Western Reaches that I'm writing where not like 9th and 10th level characters actually gain a home base, and so that could become a home base for characters. And like in the case of, for example, the Wolves of Ladonia, Their faction is their base that they get is a location anywhere within the Sablewood, which is the northernmost forest in the Western Reaches. And that castle keep players can fast travel to on return from any other location within the Sablewood. And this is because the Wolves of Ladonia are kind of rangers and they're like geared towards overland travel. So I wanted to give them like the overland travel boon based location. So that would make a really cool place for, especially if you're doing like 1-to-1 time, because that allows the players to range out very, very far and then return extremely quickly back to base. So I thought that was kind of fun. I thought that was cool. Question, what is your take on Fafhrd from Fritz Leiber? Is he a barbarian, a fighter, something else? Hi Arthur again. Thank you for asking. I think he's a barbarian. I would say he's a barbarian because I don't think what defines a barbarian is their rage. I think that was like introduced later into D&D lore. I think the original barbarians were based on Fafhrd and Conan. And so they're strong and they come from sort of a primal background. But I think that they're actually a lot more wily and interesting than maybe modern D&D has started to depict them. Conan in particular, I know more about Conan than Fafhrd. I've read more Conan stories than I have Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. But Conan is like a lot of things. He's a pirate, he's a thief, he's a barbarian by nature, but he's many other things besides that. He eventually becomes a king. Spoiler alert. That's the first Conan story that was ever released, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything. Like if you read the chronologically first released Conan story, he's like already a king. So awesome. Okay. Question. We got about 4 more minutes left. How do you handle the faction advancement when time passes? Is there going to be a lot of factions in the books and lore about them? How many? So there are only 4. They're player factions specifically. They are player factions when time passes. So their advancement is not tied to the passage of time. It's tied to the level of the character that's a part of the faction, the highest level character in the group. And if you're talking about non-player factions, there aren't really a ton of them in the Western Reaches because the world is unexplored and vast, and there are only very few power centers. So the factions that do exist are usually confined to like the city-states, and there are 5 of those. So I would have the interests of those factions develop as it makes sense for the campaign. I do have a set of tables in the Game Master's Guide that allow you to roll randomly for trouble beginning in some areas, and the trouble is always keyed to a settlement because the points of light of a location are the points of light of a setting are what are threatened by the wilds. So there's a roll table that lets you randomly develop trouble in stages at randomized places, and if the trouble is allowed to progress in those places, there's specific examples of how the progression of that trouble sort of looks, and then it can reach a crescendo. And some of those are tied into actual adventures I've previously written, where I'm sort of setting up like, here's a town. I've actually written a 5e adventure about this town where the trouble reached its crescendo, but I'm going to incorporate that into the Western Reaches starting from scratch so that you can bring it to that point during your campaign if you want to. Because part of this book is unifying my actual personal game world. So, the fact that I wrote an adventure about that means that is a thing that happened in my game world, and so I want to make sure that is a possible outcome for people who play in it as well. Okay, let's do like 1 or 2 more questions and then we'll call it. So question, would it be good to make enough potential home bases on the map so that they could potentially be spaced far enough away to be inconvenient, but not so far as to be a problem for getting back quick? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I would take a light touch on your placement of home bases. I think you want to make it so that ranging far away from them is possible but challenging. And remember that players, if you're using like freeze time, like conventional time where you stop between sessions, the players can travel as far as they want during a game session. It just depends on how long you have to play out all the travel during your session. And when we're talking about real time, they also can do that. It just means that their character is taken out of play for longer real time because they went farther, so they traveled more days, Okay, and then let's do one more. Question, will there be an expansion for levels beyond 10? As I see it right now, no. No, but thank you for asking. I still don't believe that that's in the works for Shadowdark, given that Shadowdark is very much at the individual character level. And if we go outside of that and we start talking about like domain management and like cosmic stuff and strongholds, I feel like it's a different game at that point. So I'm not saying I would never write something like that. I'm just saying that as it stands right now, the rules for Shadowdark are good for what they do, and to make something beyond 10th level would be kind of writing a different set of rules for the game. So, all right, in question, will there be late pledges? Yes, there will. We're going to be using backer kit with late pledges. We are not changing the cost of pledging late because I don't know why people do that. I just don't think that's nice. It's like punishing people for pledging late. I don't see the purpose. So we are going to extend pledging past the close of the Kickstarter. And we're going to try to keep the pricing the same. We are going to, so that we're not being punitive towards people who found out about our project late, you know? But that's what I can say for now. Yeah, that's what I know. So, and will West Marches come to Fantasy Grounds or, you know, Western Reaches? Yes, probably. Yes, the Fantasy Grounds team is working on stuff. So, okay, everybody. Well, I'm gonna call it so you all can get your evenings back. Thank you for joining me. This I think this was really fun to do as a live stream, and I'm glad fate demanded it, because then I got to answer questions and talk to you all about this stuff, and then we got a lot more meat to the video than if I just sat here and recorded for 20 minutes and then chopped it up. So I appreciate all of your questions, because that gave us a lot to talk about, and I'm excited to know what you guys want to know. And so please check out the link in the blog, in the what does Matt call it? The doobly-doo. Please check out the link in the description about, you know, Ben Robbins's blog, Ars Ludi, about this, because it is so foundational to what I'm talking about, and it's one of the best series of articles written in the old school, in my opinion. It's extremely foundational reading, and I would love for him to get more traffic and credit for his fantastic ideas on those fronts. So that's it for now, y'all. We'll be doing another live stream soon, later this week and beyond. So I'll catch you guys on the next one. Okay, happy gaming. Bye.